What would you do if your HOA president tried to unlock your truck with a master key, then called 911 on you, the sheriff? What happens when an HOA Karen tries to unlock my truck with a master key, then calls 911 without knowing I'm the sheriff? From that moment on, the neighborhood spiraled into a strange storm. Fake flags, fake councils, midnight inspections. And I realized something fast. When someone wants control, they'll cross every line until they finally hit mine. The morning it all began was the kind of quiet you don't take for granted once you've lived long enough on the rural edge of a suburban county. The sky was a pale blue wash, the kind that stretches wide over cul-de-sac rooftops and open ranch fields, soft enough to make you believe, for a moment, that the world still knows how to stay gentle. I stepped out onto my porch with a mug of coffee warm in my hand, steam drifting up like a slow ghost into the cool air. From where my property sat, half suburban lot, half open ranch, you could see the tree line, the hint of the lake past the roofs, and the dusty road that split the HOA's territory from my own piece of land. And then I saw her. Bethany Reed, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of suburban order, was hunched over the driver's door of my blue SUV like a raccoon caught elbow-deep in someone's cooler. Her bright pink blouse flashed in the morning sun, the fabric almost vibrating with the intensity of whatever she was doing. Both her hands were wrapped around the handle of my truck, and between her fingers glinted the polished shine of a brass key, large, ornate. The kind of thing someone might use to open a decorative garden gate, not a modern vehicle. She jiggled it violently, face twisted with a frustration so theatrical it almost looked painful. For a heartbeat, I wondered if I was still dreaming. Then I saw the two uniformed officers standing a few feet behind her, one with a hand on his belt, the other blinking like he'd walked into the wrong movie. Their patrol car idled at the curb, lights off, engine humming. Both men watched Bethany with that uneasy posture you only see in cops who don't know whether to intervene or apologize. My boots creaked across the porch boards as I stepped forward. "Morning," I called out, though the word felt too calm, too normal for whatever spectacle was unfolding in my driveway. Bethany spun toward me, eyes wide with outrage, as if I were the one breaking into her vehicle. "Why won't this master key open your car?" she demanded, shaking the brass thing like she expected it to confess. "This is a violation, an obvious violation." I stood there holding my coffee, blinking. "A what?" She thrust a finger at me. "All vehicles in this neighborhood must allow HOA emergency access. Your refusal is highly suspicious, sheriff or not." Except she didn't know that last part yet. Before I could reply, she whipped out her phone with the velocity of a magician, revealing a final trick. "Enough," she announced, dialing 3 numbers. "I'm calling 911. The officers exchanged looks that said they wished they were anywhere but here. "Hello?" Bethany barked into the phone. "Yes, there is a non-compliant male refusing a mandatory HOA safety inspection of his vehicle, and he is behaving suspiciously." She shot me a glare sharp enough to carve initials into my front door. "Yes, I feel threatened." One of the officers coughed into his fist. The other shifted uncomfortably. When she finally lowered the phone, she crossed her arms triumphantly, like she'd just solved a major crime. "You should know better than to interfere with official neighborhood protocol," she said. "Now step aside. The HOA master key must be tested on all vehicles within visual range of our jurisdiction." "Your jurisdiction?" I echoed. "Yes." I took a long sip of coffee, letting the warmth steady me. "Ma'am," I said, "that's my truck, on my property, and whatever that key is supposed to unlock, it's not mine." She scoffed so loudly, a squirrel in my oak tree startled and ran. One of the officers finally cleared his throat and approached me. "Sir, We just need to confirm your identity, he said quietly, clearly embarrassed for all three of us. Of course, I replied. I set down my mug on the porch railing and reached into my back pocket, pulling out my wallet. The leather was old, worn from years in the sun, dirt, and fieldwork. I flipped it open, removed my ID, and held it up so both officers could see. The first one blinked. The second one straightened. Bethany squinted, trying to read it from where she stood. Then I lifted the second item. The badge, County Sheriff. The metal caught the morning light with a bright, undeniable gleam. The officers stiffened at once, posture snapping into something respectful, relieved, and mortified all at once. One of them let out a quiet, "Oh." Bethany froze. Her face tightened, not with fear, not even with surprise, but with irritation. Deep, offended irritation, like discovering the restaurant ran out of her favorite salad dressing. "Well," she said stiffly, "sheriff or not, HOA protocols still apply. We can't have unauthorized vehicles disrupting driveway harmony." I stared at her for a long moment, wondering if she truly believed a sheriff's truck, parked on land she didn't control, fell under the reign of her laminated rulebook. "Bethany," I said slowly, "why exactly are you trying to open my vehicle with a brass key?" She lifted her chin. "Because," she declared, "every responsible HOA president ensures emergency access to local transportation assets." "Transportation assets," I repeated. "You mean cars?" "It's in the interest of safety," she snapped. "Now step aside. This is standard procedure." "For what emergency?" I asked. "That is not for you to decide." The officers behind her shifted again, one rubbing the bridge of his nose, the other pretending to inspect his shoes. And just like that, the quiet morning I'd been hoping for disintegrated into something else, something bigger, stranger, and far more dangerous than an overzealous HOA president with a decorative key. Because anyone who looked that determined to open a sheriff's vehicle, on land they didn't control, wasn't just enforcing rules. They were crossing lines, lines I knew she'd cross again, lines she had no idea I was prepared to defend. I watched Bethany march back toward her Prius, clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a holy book of suburban law. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even acknowledge the officers, who were doing everything in their power not to laugh or cry. She simply slid into her driver's seat, started the engine with a dramatic rev, despite driving a hybrid, and sped off down the cul-de-sac as if she expected applause to follow her. The moment she disappeared around the curve, the officers turned to me in unison. "Sheriff, sorry about that," the taller one said. I offered them both a nod. "You're fine. Not your fault she thinks HOA bylaws outrank state law." They chuckled, relief loosening their shoulders. With a final wave, they climbed back into their cruiser and rolled down the street, leaving the neighborhood unusually still, like the air had tightened around us, waiting for whatever came next. I picked up my coffee mug again. It had gone lukewarm, but I drank it anyway. The bitterness cut through the cotton in my throat. I'd come here 3 years earlier, back when the cul-de-sac was quiet. The trees around the property line still had their full summer canopy, and the lake shimmered like a piece of blue glass resting in the valley. I had been a different man then, more raw, like an open wound that hadn't decided whether to heal or scar. My older brother, Eli, had died the year before. Dam structural collapse out by the canyon. He'd been inspecting a stress point when the concrete gave way. A freak accident, they called it. A low-probability failure event. Engineers like to dress tragedy in technical language. Makes it feel cleaner, easier to put away. It didn't work. Not for me. After the funeral, I'd driven around the state for weeks, just drifting. I wanted a place where the world didn't feel like it was teetering on the edge of something dangerous, somewhere with enough open land that I could breathe again. When I found the cabin at the end of Bluff Creek Lane, a small ranch-style home that backed up to trees instead of neighbors. I knew it was the closest thing to peace I was ever going to find. The lot sat right next to the HOA boundary, though technically outside it. The realtor explained it twice. "They can't regulate you," she said. "Your land is your own." I believed her. I didn't know yet how people like Bethany operated. They didn't need a deed to feel entitled to power, only a clipboard and an audience. My first week after moving in, I'd parked my sheriff's cruiser in the driveway. I wasn't on duty that day, but out here in the county, law is never more than a radio call away. The sun had just dipped behind the hills when I heard footsteps on gravel. I turned to see a woman in a peach-colored cardigan marching up the driveway like she was conducting an inspection on a military base. She didn't introduce herself, didn't even say hello. "Law enforcement vehicles may cause unnecessary alarm," she told me, nodding at the cruiser as though it were emitting toxic fumes. "I'll need you to park that elsewhere." I remember staring at her, waiting for the punchline. "Ma'am," I said gently, "this vehicle is legally registered, legally parked, and, most importantly, on land that doesn't belong to your HOA." She wrote something on her clipboard anyway, lips pursed like she'd just tasted sour milk. "Consider this your first notice," she said. And with that, she walked off. I'd stood there for a long moment afterward, watching the last of the daylight catch on the cruiser's reflective decals. A bird flew across the lake. A breeze rustled through the oaks. And I felt, for the first time since buying the place, a flicker of unease. I tried to ignore it, but the unease grew legs. A few days later, I walked out to grab morning mail and found a paper taped to the cruiser windshield. The wind had curled the corners, but the message remained bold and proud. "Unauthorized government imagery visible from public view. $45 fine." Below it, her name, signed with the flourish of someone who thought the world needed more of her handwriting. Bethany Reed, HOA President. I laughed out loud. In hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe if I'd taken it more seriously, if I'd addressed things sooner. But no. Someone like Bethany doesn't get better with boundaries. She pushes until she hits reinforced concrete. I peeled the notice from the windshield and placed it in a drawer labeled miscellaneous. I didn't know then that I'd eventually need an entire filing cabinet. After that, the incidents came in slow waves, like small ripples across otherwise calm water. A complaint about the glare from my truck's chrome grille. A note accusing my tires of creating unauthorized terrain modification after a rainstorm left soft mud on the road. She even printed out a list of aesthetic guidelines and placed it under my doormat with a sticky note. "This applies to all visible vehicles. Please comply." Bethany. As if my truck were a family pet, she wanted shaved for summer. For a while, I chalked it up to her obsessive nature. Some folks find purpose in organizing spice cabinets alphabetically. Others build kingdoms from HOA bylaws. But beneath every notice, every complaint, every accusation, I felt something shifting. Subtle at first, then more pronounced. It was like she wasn't just enforcing rules. She was probing, testing, seeing how far she could reach onto land that wasn't hers to touch. And then, one evening, she knocked on my door holding a stack of printed forms with a bright blue header. "Mandatory Vehicle Access Key Program," she announced proudly. "All residents must provide a spare key for HOA emergency use." I blinked at her. "No," I said. She blinked back, as if she'd never heard the word before. "We'll revisit this," she snapped. And she did, over and over. Until this morning, when I stepped out onto my porch and watched her jam a brass master key into the lock of my SUV. The question that had been simmering for months finally surfaced, sharp and undeniable. Why was she so determined to control what she didn't own? The wind picked up slightly, pushing a dry leaf across the edge of my porch. I exhaled slowly. The lake shimmered beyond the houses. The world around me looked calm enough, but inside something had shifted. This wasn't petty HOA overreach anymore. This was the start of something bigger, something I could feel gathering like distant thunder. For a few days after the master key incident, things went strangely quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your instincts twitch, even when the sun sits warm on your shoulders and the breeze smells like pine and fresh-cut grass. Bethany didn't march up my driveway. No new notices appeared taped to my truck. No neighbors whispered warnings over their fences. It was as if the HOA president had simply paused. And that wasn't like her at all. The quiet felt staged, rehearsed, as if she'd walked off the scene of a play only to re-enter with a new script in hand. I should have known the next act was coming. It showed up the following Monday in the form of another piece of paper, this time folded neatly and tucked under the wiper blade of my SUV. The early afternoon sun warmed the hood, glinting off the chrome grille where Bethany claimed it intimidated her. I plucked the paper free and unfolded it. Unauthorized tire tracks after rain, $25 correction fee, photo evidence on file. I looked around. The driveway was bone dry. Whatever evidence she thought she had, it didn't come from this week. I took the notice inside, set it on my kitchen counter, and opened the drawer that now held a small stack of her earlier attempts at control. I placed the new one on top, closed the drawer, and stared at it for a moment. Then I sighed. Part of me had hoped she'd burn out on her own. But people like Bethany don't run out of energy. They run on the energy they steal from other people. The more resistance they meet, the more power they think they're entitled to. The next day, a fresh note appeared. Reflective grill surface causing visual discomfort to residents. $30 mitigation fee. And the day after that, truck shadow extending past acceptable limits. $40. Aesthetic impact fee. A shadow. She fined me for a shadow. I walked around the truck, watching the afternoon sunlight stretch the dark outline across the gravel. I crouched down, ran my hand across the cool metal of the fender, and let the absurdity seep in until I almost laughed. Almost. I retrieved a manila folder from my office and began sorting each notice meticulously. A lawman learns early in his career that documentation beats emotion every time. Facts carry weight, paper trails don't vanish, and the people who think they're untouchable usually forget how visible they really are. I wrote the date on the folder. Unlawful HOA activity. Read. Then I slipped it into my file cabinet. I didn't know then how fat that folder would become. 3 days later, the final spark arrived, the spark that turned petty irritation into something darker. I'd just stepped out to water the small patch of grass near the porch when a shadow fell across the driveway. Bethany stood there, wearing a navy skirt and a floral blouse, holding a fresh stack of forms. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but the stiff set of her jaw told me she'd made up her mind about something. "Sheriff Cole," she announced. "The HOA is implementing a new safety protocol. All residents must supply a spare key for their vehicles." I let the hose fall slack in my hand. "No," I said simply. She blinked like she hadn't heard correctly. "This is for emergencies." "Then call emergency services," I replied. "HOA emergencies," she corrected, as though that clarified anything. I turned off the hose. "Bethany, I'm not giving you a key to my vehicle." Her face twitched, a small crack in her polished expression. "We'll revisit this," she snapped, and turned sharply on her heel, walking back toward her house with clipped steps. That should have been the end of it. But of course it wasn't. Later that week, I spotted something odd near the community bulletin board. one of those weatherproof glass cases mounted on wooden posts at the entrance to the neighborhood. Inside, someone had pinned a printed notice. Upcoming bylaw review vehicle access and emergency. Key program mandatory vote in 14 days below it, in smaller text. All residents must comply with HOA vehicle access standards. Only one problem. My property wasn't part of the HOA. The boundary line was clearly marked on the original county plat. I'd reviewed it before I purchased the land, studied the deed, and even asked the county clerk to confirm it. Yet there, at the edge of the cul-de-sac, was a piece of paper suggesting that my rights were up for a vote. I studied the notice for a long minute. The glass door rattled slightly in the breeze, but the paper remained pinned, unwavering, bold. That was when the suspicion began to creep in. Slow at first, then sharper, like a splinter you can't ignore. Bethany wasn't simply enforcing rules, she was expanding them, redrawing imaginary borders, testing invisible fences, treating the HOA like an empire and my driveway like disputed territory. And she'd convinced herself she could win. One evening, around dusk, I spotted her across the street talking to two neighbors, gesturing at my property line, pointing toward my truck, waving her clipboard like she was mapping out troop movements. The neighbors looked uncomfortable, shifting on their feet, nodding along but not meeting her eyes. I watched from my porch, arms folded, the wood railing warm beneath my palms. The lake behind the houses flickered with the last orange light of the day. A heron flew low across the water, wings brushing the surface. For a moment, all I wanted was for the world to stay that peaceful, that still. But peace was a fragile thing around people who feared losing control. The next morning, I found a brand new notice taped to my door. Mandatory vehicle access compliance meeting attendance required, and beneath it, handwritten in firm strokes, "See me immediately. Bethany." I removed the notice carefully, folded it, and added it to the folder. The stack was beginning to feel heavier. I leaned back against the doorway, watching the wind ripple through the trees at the edge of my property. The air smelled faintly of dust and lake water, the scent of the place I'd once imagined would give me rest. Instead, I felt tension gathering in the air, like pressure before a storm. I knew then that I couldn't ignore her any longer. Because the HOA president wasn't just pushing rules, she was pushing her reach. And when someone like Bethany wants control, they don't stop at the boundary line. They try to redraw it. The storm arrived the next morning, not with thunder or rain, but with color. Neon orange, to be exact. I stepped out onto my porch just after sunrise, coffee in hand, expecting the same still quiet that usually wrapped the cul-de-sac in early hours. The lake beyond the houses shimmered like a sheet of cool glass. A faint mist clung to the treetops. The smell of damp soil drifted on the breeze. Everything felt calm, until I looked down my driveway. Rows of fluorescent orange flags, thin plastic stakes topped with bright tabs, lined both sides of the gravel like a miniature runway. 26 of them, set at precise intervals, standing stiff as soldiers. They caught the morning light and glowed unnatural against the dusty earth. For a moment, I just stared. Then I walked down the steps, boots crunching softly over the gravel, steam rising from my coffee. The closer I got, the more absurd it became. Each flag carried a laminated tag, the bold black letters vibrating with the wind. HOA claim pending. Vehicle access gate under review. A gate across my driveway, on my land. I crouched down and ran my thumb across the edge of one flag. The soil was still soft where it had been pressed in, fresh. Whoever planted these had done so either late last night or very early this morning, and I didn't need a handwriting analyst to know exactly who that was. I heard footsteps behind me before I saw her. Not just footsteps, her footsteps. Quick, self-important, unmistakable in their rhythm, the cadence of someone who believed the ground acknowledged her presence. I stood slowly. There she was, Bethany Reed, HOA president, suburban monarch in a pair of large sunglasses that covered half her face. She walked toward me with the poise of someone unveiling a grand accomplishment. Her blouse today was mint green, bright enough to be seen from orbit. "Good morning, Sheriff," she said, voice falsely cheerful. "Morning," I replied. "Care to explain why my driveway looks like a landing strip for traffic cones?" She clasped her clipboard to her chest, the way a preacher holds scripture. "These are preliminary markers." "For what?" I asked. "For the gate," she said, as if announcing the arrival of a long-awaited guest. "The HOA has initiated a vehicle access evaluation due to ongoing non-compliance." I blinked. Twice. "A gate?" I repeated. "Across my driveway?" She nodded. "Yes. To regulate vehicle flow and ensure community safety." "My driveway isn't part of your HOA." Her smile sharpened. "Property lines are fluid when safety is at stake." Fluid. Like water. Or maybe like the truth, when held by someone determined to twist it. "Bethany," I said, voice steady, "you're trespassing." "Oh, Sheriff," she replied, waving dismissively. "Let's not get dramatic. This benefits the entire neighborhood." "Which neighborhood?" I asked. "Because I don't recall signing on to yours." She shifted, slightly, a flicker of irritation tightening her jaw. "Residents are concerned about your vehicle. The size, the silhouette, the authority symbolism." "The what?" "The implied authority," she corrected. "It disrupts driveway harmony." Driveway harmony. A phrase crafted with the precision of someone who spent too much time alone with a thesaurus and too little with reality. I took a long breath, letting it settle under my ribs. "Bethany," I said carefully, "who approved this?" "The board," she answered quickly. "That fast?" She hesitated, the briefest stumble, but I caught it. "Well," she said, adjusting her sunglasses, "unanimous in spirit." "Spirit?" I raised a brow. "Does spirit vote now?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Her grip tightened on the clipboard. I bent down and plucked one of the flags from the ground, turning it between my fingers. "So you planted these yourself?" "Of course I did," she said proudly. "Leadership requires initiative." "No," I said. "Leadership requires authority, and you don't have any here." Her cheeks flushed pink. Whether from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. "Sheriff Cole," she said tightly, "your continued refusal to cooperate only strengthens the argument for strict access regulation." "And your continued trespassing only strengthens my case file," I replied. For a beat, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled through the oak branches overhead, carrying the scent of dew and dust. A passing pickup rumbled along the cul-de-sac, slowing as the driver spotted the field of orange flags. He lifted 2 fingers from the wheel in a sympathetic salute. Bethany ignored him. "This isn't optional," she declared. "The gate is happening." I met her gaze without flinching. "Not on my land." "We'll see about that." Then she turned sharply, sandals slapping the pavement as she marched back toward her house, chin lifted in righteous fury. I watched her go. Then I crouched again, examining the flags with the careful eye I used at crime scenes. Each stake was placed with obsessive alignment, equidistant, straight as rails, forming a narrow corridor up the driveway toward my SUV, like she was laying the foundation of a ceremonial processional, or marking territory. Her territory. Except it wasn't. I pulled out my phone, taking photos from multiple angles, flags, footprints, the distance between them, the exact position relative to the property line. Documentation wasn't optional anymore. It was necessary. Because the truth was simple. Bethany wasn't reacting. She was planning. And whatever she had planned was beyond anything I'd seen from her before. As I gathered the flags into a small pile, the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the gravel. The air warmed, but the knot in my stomach didn't ease. The driveway no longer felt like my own. It felt like a battleground. I carried the neon flags into my garage, set them beside the workbench, and stood for a long moment in the dim, dusty quiet. Light filtered through the slats of the window blinds, carving thin golden lines across the concrete floor. I could smell old lumber, motor oil, and lake wind drifting in through the open side door. This place had once felt like a refuge, a place to patch fences or sharpen tools while the sun dipped low behind the pines. But now, even the silence held tension. I told myself the worst of it was over, that the flags were the peak of her theatrics, that surely no one, not even Bethany, would escalate beyond planting stakes in land she didn't own. I should have known better. The escalation arrived at dawn the next morning. I stepped outside before the sun fully crested the hills. The lake still wore its thin veil of morning mist, the air crisp enough to sting my lungs. I walked toward my truck out of habit, checking the tires, the doors, the bed, just a sheriff's routine. But halfway down the porch steps, I stopped. A large, bright yellow metal clamp gripped the front tire of my blue SUV like a giant steel jaw. Its surface gleamed in the first rays of sunlight. Thick metal teeth bit into the rubber. A laminated tag dangled from the lock, flapping in the breeze. HOA impound. Non-compliant vehicle release fee, $390. For a long moment, I didn't move, didn't breathe. The only sound was the faint hum of the waking neighborhood, the distant bark of a dog, a lawn sprinkler sputtering to life, the low trill of morning birds. Then, slowly, I crouched beside the clamp, laying my hand against the cold metal. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a warning. This was an act of force. My jaw tightened. The knot in my stomach drew itself into something sharper. I stood and scanned the cul-de-sac. Windows glinted in the soft light. A curtain shifted in one of the houses. A neighbor's truck pulled onto the main road. And at the far end of the street, stepping out from behind a maple tree as if she'd been waiting for her cue, Bethany Reed appeared. She stalked down the pavement like a woman approaching the podium at her own coronation. Her blouse today was a blistering shade of coral, bright enough to challenge the sunrise itself. She carried her clipboard under her arm like a sword. "Well," she called out, "perhaps now you'll learn to respect community authority." I let out a slow breath. "You put a wheel clamp on my truck." She placed a hand on her hip. "It's not your truck. It's a community-adjacent vehicle subject to oversight. On my property." "That is irrelevant," she said sharply. "Repeated violations justify impoundment." I stared at her. She truly believed her own words. "Bethany," I said, calm but firm, "this is illegal." She smiled, a thin, triumphant smile. "No, this is proactive neighborhood safety enforcement. You immobilized a law enforcement vehicle." Her expression hardened. "A vehicle used to intimidate residents." I blinked. "It's a truck." "It's symbolic," she insisted. "Authority symbolism disrupts driveway harmony." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or call the paramedics. "Remove it," I said quietly. She recoiled. "Absolutely not. You will pay the release fee just like everyone else." "No one else has ever had a boot on their car," I said. Her chin lifted defiantly. "No one else has ever been this non-compliant." The absurdity was almost enough to make me forget the seriousness of the act. Almost. I pulled my phone from my pocket and snapped several photos. Wide shots, close shots, angles capturing both the clamp and the house number behind it. Bethany scoffed. "Oh, please. You think pictures will scare me?" "No," I answered, "but they will help the police." She froze mid-step, her face twisting ever so slightly. "Police? You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I dare," I said, dialing. I called the sheriff's office. Not 911, not emergency dispatch. Just the standard line. Procedure matters. So does professionalism. And even though I was sheriff, I was also the victim. I couldn't handle the case myself. "Deputy on the way," the dispatcher confirmed. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Bethany sputtered. You're weaponizing law enforcement. This is harassment." "No," I replied. "This," I said, pointing at the clamp, "is tampering." A few minutes later, a familiar cruiser rolled into view. Deputy Marcus Hernandez stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots. Marcus was young but sharp, a man who understood when to step gently and when to step firmly. He looked at me first, then at the clamp. His shoulders sagged. "Oh no," he muttered. "Not again." "Morning, Marcus," I said. "Morning, Sheriff." Bethany rushed toward him like reinforcements had arrived on her behalf. "Officer, arrest him for refusing to follow HOA impoundment protocol." Marcus blinked. "Ma'am, there is no HOA impoundment protocol." "There should be," she declared. "That's not how laws work." She jabbed her clipboard at the clamp. "This vehicle is disrupting community order." Marcus sighed, then pulled out his notepad. "Ma'am, did you place this device on the sheriff's truck?" "I issued a lawful corrective action," she answered proudly. "Did you buy this online?" "Yes," she said. "It's heavy duty. Comes in different colors." Marcus rubbed his temple. "Ma'am, you cannot immobilize property that isn't yours. This is tampering and potentially vehicle interference." She gasped as if personally insulted by the law itself. "How dare you imply the—" "He's not implying," I interrupted. "He's reading the law." What followed was a tense standoff between her stubbornness and the deputy's patience. Eventually, Marcus repeated his order. "Remove the clamp, or we will." Bethany glared with the fury of a summer storm, but even she wasn't bold enough to escalate further with a deputy standing there. With sharp, angry movements, she knelt, fiddled with the lock, and yanked the clamp off the tire. She dragged it down the driveway like a wounded animal, muttering accusations of tyranny and vehicular chaos. Marcus watched her go, then turned to me. "She's escalating." "I know. You documenting everything?" "Every scrap of it." He nodded once. "Good. You're gonna need it." I watched Bethany retreat across the cul-de-sac, her shoulders tight with indignation, her footsteps clipped and fast. The wheel clamp sat abandoned on the curb like a discarded trophy. But I knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. Because humiliation fuels people like Bethany, and she had just been set on fire. For a day or two, she vanished from sight. No barking at neighbors over hedge heights. No dramatic clipboard marches up and down the street. No new violations taped to my door. Just a thick, unsettling silence. The kind that settles before a dust storm rolls across open ranch land, when the wind dies and even the insects hold their breath. I'd seen that kind of silence in my line of work. It meant someone was planning, and in Bethany's case, planning meant trouble. On the third morning, something changed. I stepped outside to get the mail and noticed a strange glint of glossy paper reflecting sunlight from across the cul-de-sac. Then another, and another, like someone had sprinkled brochures across the neighborhood. A stack of them was wedged tight into every mailbox, taped to lampposts, tucked under doormats, even stuck to trash bins with strips of pink glitter tape. The whole street was littered with color, as if some overzealous salesman had passed through overnight. Then I saw the title. The Community Vehicle Harmony Initiative. presented by the Bluff Neighborhood Mobility Council. I stared at the cover for a long beat, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. A stock photo of a quiet suburban road stretched beneath the heading. Trees, parked cars, nothing out of the ordinary, except someone had added sparkles around the vehicles, as if they radiated saintly light. I flipped open the first page. Inside was pure madness. Mandatory emergency keys for all vehicles. Driveway rotation schedules to maximize harmony. Silhouette inspections every third Thursday. Restrictions on colors considered aggressive. A requirement that all residents attend mobility orientation training. And the kicker. A required $89 harmony fee, payable immediately. A QR code sat at the bottom of the page, and beneath it, payments processed through Bluff Vehicle Safety Fund, PayPal. There was no such thing in the county. Never had been. I checked the mailbox again. Sure enough, another packet was wedged underneath the first, thicker, heavier. Inside that one was a poorly designed chart showing vehicle risk levels. My SUV sat at the far end of the spectrum in bright red, labeled Potential Threat Indicator, High. Her imagination had matured from shadow finds to full-blown propaganda. Across the street, my neighbor Mark emerged from his house, wearing flannel pajama pants and holding two of the packets between his fingers like they were contaminated. "Remy," he groaned, "tell me this isn't real." "Depends," I said. "Did it ask you for money?" "Immediately," he replied. "Then it accused my Honda of assertive headlights." "That tracks," I muttered. He ran a hand through his hair. "She's gone too far this time. You need to stop her." I didn't correct him, not because I agreed, but because I knew the truth. People like Bethany don't stop when you tell them to. They stop when someone with the right evidence forces the issue. Still, the look on Mark's face, exhaustion, irritation, a touch of fear, told me the neighborhood wasn't just annoyed anymore. They were worn down. People moved to quiet communities to escape chaos, and Bethany had turned this one into a theater of constant tension. By noon, half the cul-de-sac had gathered in small clusters on the sidewalks, holding packets like puzzle pieces from a board game no one wanted to play. Every few minutes, a new resident came forward with a fresh citation from inside their mailbox. Emotionally disruptive parking posture. Insufficient wheel humility. Excessive vehicle optimism. I had to hide a smile at that last one. If nothing else, Bethany's imagination deserved an award. But behind the humor was something darker. She was no longer pretending to follow HOA bylaws. She was inventing her own government. That afternoon, I carried the packet inside and laid it on my dining table. The late sun cast a warm glow across the wood grain, dust motes drifting lazily in the air. I flipped through each page, snapping photos, making notes. Years of sheriffling had taught me that good cases don't start with confrontation. They start with documentation. While I worked, a knock sounded at the front door. Sharp, quick, urgent. I opened it to find Jill, the HOA board treasurer, standing on the porch, her normally calm face tight with worry. She held one of Bethany's packets against her chest like a shield. "Sheriff Cole," she whispered, glancing around. We didn't authorize any of this." "I know," I said. "She used the board's names on these documents, printed them without permission. She even told residents that we approved the fee schedule. She didn't." "Of course not," Jill hissed. "But people are scared to challenge her. She treats every question like an attack." I nodded slowly. "And now she's formed a fake council." "Not just formed," Jill said quietly. "She's claiming authority over properties outside the HOA, including yours." The words hung in the air like smoke. My land, her rules, a collision waiting to happen. "Sheriff," Jill said, voice trembling, "we need help. The board wants to remove her, but she'll fight it, and she scares people. She doesn't scare me, I said. Jill exhaled, relief visible in her shoulders. Then, please, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. She walked away, hugging the packet like it was a dangerous artifact. As the sky deepened toward evening, I stepped onto the porch again. The breeze carried the scent of the lake and the faint sweetness of wild sage. Porch light glowed from neighboring homes, but the peaceful scene felt like a facade stretched too thin over something restless beneath. This wasn't just HOA trouble anymore. It was a rogue authority. One woman rewriting rules to fill whatever emptiness lived inside her. As I stood there, my phone buzzed with a text from Deputy Marcus. Got your photos. Keep everything. She's crossing lines now. Real ones. I looked down the street toward Bethany's house. The porch light flicked on. A silhouette moved behind the curtains. The lake was calm. The sky was quiet. But in my gut, I knew. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. For the rest of that evening, I moved around my house with the slow awareness of someone waiting for something to break. It wasn't fear. Fear was too sharp, too energized. This was more like the feeling before a structure fails, the faint internal groan of wood under strain. A lawman learns to read patterns, and Bethany's pattern had never been subtle. Whenever she went silent, she came back louder. The sun slipped behind the hills, taking the day's color with it. Streetlights snapped on one by one. Porch bulbs glowed warm behind screen doors. Across the neighborhood, families settled into dinners, televisions, and routines meant to shield them from the nonsense they'd endured the past week. But I stayed awake. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, walked out to the porch, and sat in the old cedar chair Eli helped me build years ago. I let the night sounds settle around me, crickets tuning themselves into rhythm, the distant splash of something on the lake's surface, the soft creak of the porch wood cooling under the evening air. For a few minutes, it felt peaceful, deceptively peaceful. Then my phone buzzed. Emotion alert. Trail cam. Back driveway. My pulse didn't jump, just steadied, sharpening, like my instincts snapping into position. I opened the app. There, lit in grainy night vision green, was a figure kneeling beside my SUV's front tire. Her reflective vest caught the faint light like a lighthouse beacon. Her hair was pulled back, her shoulders hunched with a familiar tension. Bethany. She held a tape measure in one hand, stretched across the tread of my tire like she was calculating the length of a runway. In her other hand, she clutched a clipboard, flipping between pages with frantic purpose. Every few seconds, she glanced around the dark cul-de-sac, as though expecting applause or ambush, maybe both. I watched her lift a stud finder, one meant for drywall, and press it to my fender, sliding it slowly across the curve of the metal like she expected it to reveal buried treasure. The device beeped uselessly. She wrote something down anyway. Then she stepped back and stared at the truck with a focus so intense it almost made me uneasy. It wasn't anger on her face. It was conviction. The kind of conviction that makes people dangerous. I stood from the porch chair and walked down the steps, boots whispering against the gravel. I didn't rush. Didn't make a sound until I reached the edge of the driveway. "Evening, Bethany." She gasped so violently she dropped the tape measure. It clattered against the pavement with a metallic slap, rolling a few inches before stopping. "You," she sputtered, clutching her clipboard as though it were a shield. "You startled me." "You're on my property at midnight," I said, voice calm but firm. "That tends to surprise people." She straightened, chin lifting with manufactured dignity. "I am conducting an emergency assessment." "At midnight?" "Timing," she declared, "is irrelevant when harmony is at stake." I raised an eyebrow. "Harmony?" "Yes," she snapped, regaining some of her earlier bluster. "We received multiple community complaints about your vehicle today." "From who?" "Anonymous sources," she said quickly. "For their safety." Safety. That was her favorite word. She wore it like armor, even when wielding it like a weapon. My gaze dropped to the stud finder lying near her foot. "You planning on hanging pictures on my truck?" She bristled. "This is a structural integrity scan." "It's a stud finder, Bethany." "Uniform," she corrected, as if the lie had become truth merely because she said it. "Vest," I replied. "You are obstructing justice," she hissed. "No," I said quietly. "I'm obstructing trespassing." She froze, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw something flicker behind her confidence. Not fear, not guilt, recognition. She glanced toward the small trail cam mounted to the corner of my garage, the little blinking red light giving her away, its mechanical eye watching everything. "You're being recorded," I said, her hands clenched around her clipboard. "You can't use that against me." "I don't need to," I answered. "You're doing that on your own." The silence that followed was brittle, stretched tight between us. The breeze picked up, rustling the leaves in the large oak tree over our heads. Somewhere across the lake, a coyote yipped at the moon. Then, as if breaking from a spell, Bethany stepped back off the gravel and onto the public road with quick, jerky movements. "This isn't over," she muttered. "You cannot stop the initiative. You cannot stop the council." "Bethany," I said, "the council isn't real." She pressed a trembling hand to her temple, then pointed her clipboard at me like it were a badge of honor. "It is real," she whispered fiercely. "It exists in service of order, and order will prevail." Then she turned and disappeared into the shadows of the cul-de-sac, her reflective vest flashing once, twice, then fading entirely. I stood there alone, the night settling around me again, the air suddenly colder. Slowly, I walked back to the porch and sat down, reviewing the footage on my phone. Every second of her unauthorized inspection now existed in crisp clarity. Her measurements, her scribbled notes, her trespassing, her invented authority. Twist number 2. Hard proof. The kind of evidence you don't just use, you build around. I saved the video, then backed it up twice. Just as I slipped my phone into my pocket, another message appeared on the screen. "Deputy Marcus, you still up?" I texted back, "Yeah." Seconds later, "She's losing control. Keep recording everything." I stared out into the darkness, the wind stirring lightly across my property. The lake shimmered faintly through gaps in the trees, reflecting the thin, crescent moon. "I am," I said to no one, because the truth was written not just in the footage, not just in the packets or the clamp or the flags. It was written in her eyes when she realized the camera was watching. Bethany wasn't spiraling. She was accelerating. And every step she took buried her deeper in the case she didn't even know she was building against herself. I looked down the street toward Bethany's house. The porch light flicked on. A silhouette moved behind the curtains. The lake was calm. The sky was quiet. But in my gut, I knew. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. By morning, the neighborhood's uneasy hum had settled into something sharper, an undercurrent of anticipation I could feel even before stepping outside. Folks watered plants a little faster, checked their mail twice, lingered near their driveways, as though expecting more absurd violations to appear out of thin air. Even the birds seemed quieter, like the whole cul-de-sac was holding its breath. The emergency HOA meeting had been announced the night before. One of the board members, Jill, slipped a note under my door asking that I attend for the sake of clarity and order. Those were her words, but I could read the subtext well enough. Please bring the evidence before she destroys what's left of us. So after lunch, I tucked 3 binders beneath my arm, each labeled with tidy black marker, and locked up the house. The sun was bright, casting long shadows across the gravel as I made my way down the drive. My boots crushed fallen leaves, each step echoing with a sense of finality. The community hall sat near the entrance of the neighborhood, a low brick building with big windows and a wooden sign carved to look welcoming, though today it felt anything but. Cars lined the curb, people milled around outside in small nervous circles, clutching packets from the fake council or waving violation notices like proof of haunting. Inside, it was worse. The air buzzed with tension, the old fluorescent lights flickering overhead like they were nervous too. Metal folding chairs formed crooked rows. Neighbors filled nearly every one, faces tight, eyes darting toward the doorway, whispering behind hands. Some held their packets on their laps. Others clutched their citations like boarding passes to a doomed flight. I stepped in quietly, nodding to familiar faces. A few nodded back with relief, a few with worry. Jill hurried over, cheeks flushed, hair pulled into a stressed knot. "Thank God you're here," she whispered. "She's planning something. I can feel it." "She usually is," I said. "We're all set," she continued. "Projector works, microphone works, the board is ready. Just stay close." "I'm not going anywhere." She exhaled shakily and hurried to the front of the room where the other board members sat behind a plastic folding table. Their expressions ranged from exhausted to terrified. Then, without warning, the door slammed open. Every head snapped toward the sound. And there she stood. Bethany Reed swept into the room like a hurricane wrapped in a blazer. Today's outfit: navy jacket, white slacks, a pearl necklace that flashed every time she turned her head. She carried her clipboard like a general's sword, and under her opposite arm, a stack of Mobility Harmony Initiative packets, thick enough to choke a horse. She didn't walk to the front. She marched, heels stabbing the linoleum, chin high with righteous fury. "There will be order," she declared. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jill, already standing at the podium, raised her voice. "The meeting hasn't started yet." Bethany ignored her completely. "Given the heightened instability caused by unauthorized vehicular activity, I will be conducting tonight's proceedings." "No," Jill said sharply. The room froze. Bethany blinked, visibly startled. The word no had never been spoken to her with such clarity, not by neighbors, not by the board, certainly not by anyone she considered beneath the HOA throne she'd built in her head. Then Jill repeated it, stronger this time. "No. You will sit down." Whispers swept the room like wind moving through tall, dry grass. A few neighbors leaned forward, waiting for the explosion. Bethany's eyes darted across the hall until they landed on me. She stared the way someone stares at a lifeline they refuse to admit they need. But I didn't move. I just folded my arms and leaned back against the wall. Realization struck her like a slap. Her jaw tightened. Her nostrils flared. Then, a miracle. She sat. Jill cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming. Today we will address several concerns raised by residents regarding President Reed's recent actions." "Lies," Bethany hissed. "Sit," Jill repeated. And Bethany did. The board exchanged glances, equal parts astonished and relieved. Then Jill nodded to me. It was my cue. I stepped forward, the binders heavy in my hands. The projector cast a warm square of light across the wall. I set the binders down on the table and opened the first one. "Good evening," I said, voice steady. "Most of you know me as your neighbor. Some of you also know me as the county sheriff." A hush settled over the room. "I didn't come here to accuse anyone," I came here to explain the sequence of events that led to today. I lifted the first printed photo. Bethany hunched over my SUV with her brass master key, officers standing awkwardly behind her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She attempted to open my truck under the claim of mandatory HOA emergency access. When the key did not work, she called 911 to report me as suspicious. I paused. She did not know she was calling the sheriff. Someone in the back muttered, "You're kidding." Someone else whispered, "I heard about that." Another, "I knew she'd go too far someday." I placed the next photo on the projector. The wheel clamp, bright yellow, locked onto my front tire. She purchased an immobilization device online, I said, and attached it to my vehicle on my private driveway, property not governed by the HOA. A low rumble of outrage moved through the residence. Next came the neon flags, then the barricade, then the Mobility Harmony Initiative with its fake council seal. The PayPal QR code projected across the wall like a spotlight on her intentions. And finally, the midnight inspection footage, Bethany measuring tire angles, scanning the fender with a stud finder, trespassing after dark. The room erupted. "She came onto your property? She measured your what? That's illegal. She tried that on my car too, said my side mirrors were too confident." Even the board members stared at the footage with stunned disbelief. I closed the binder softly. "She didn't just issue violations," I said. "She impersonated authority. She created a fraudulent council, and she attempted to collect money under an unregistered, non-existent entity." I stepped back from the projector. This isn't about rules. This is about control, and it has harmed every single resident here. Silence. Then Jill rose to her feet, voice steady but trembling with resolve. "The board moves to vote on the immediate removal of Bethany Reed as HOA president." The room erupted again, this time in applause, cheers, relieved laughter, people slapping knees and whispering, "Finally." Bethany shot to her feet, face flushed red. "No," she shouted. "You can't do this. I am the only one holding this community together. Without me, you'll descend into vehicular mayhem." "All in favor?" Jill asked. Dozens of hands shot into the air. "All opposed?" Only one hand rose. Bethany's. Jill nodded once. "Motion carries. Effective immediately, Bethany Reed is removed from her position as HOA president." The hall filled with a sound I hadn't heard in weeks. Relief. People clapped. Some hugged. One neighbor wiped tears from her eyes. Another crumpled her stack of citations and threw them in the trash. And Bethany, she stood frozen, clipboard trembling in her hand, eyes blazing with disbelief and fury. "This isn't over," she growled at me. "You haven't escaped harmony. I will return stronger than ever." Then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the projector flickered. And just like that, the tyrant fell. But the unease in my stomach told me one thing. She wasn't done. Not yet. The room was still buzzing when the door finally stopped rattling. A few neighbors stood in stunned silence, staring at the entrance as if expecting Bethany to burst back through it with a bullhorn or a stack of freshly printed citations. Others clapped, some laughed nervously, and a handful simply sagged into their chairs with the relieved exhaustion of people who had been under siege. Jill wiped her palms on her skirt and leaned against the podium as if her knees had finally given out. I can't believe that worked," she murmured. "It didn't just work," said Mark, stepping up beside her. "It was overdue." All around us, residents began talking, first quietly, then louder, their voices rising like a community waking from a long nightmare. People walked up to each other exchanging the strangest small confessions. "She fined me for parking too confidently. She wrote up my minivan for unbalanced headlight posture. She told me my tires looked judgmental. I could only shake my head. Someone slapped my back lightly. It was old Mr. Whitaker from 2 houses down, smelling faintly of cedar shavings and pipe tobacco. "You saved this neighborhood, Sheriff," he chuckled. "Or at least saved us from annual vehicular performance reviews." "I just showed the truth," I said. "That's more than anyone else dared to do," he replied. But beneath the laughter and relief, the unease still curled low in my stomach like a sleeping animal. I'd seen people like Bethany before. In law enforcement, you cross paths with personalities that bend rules, then break them, then build whole structures out of the broken pieces. Those people don't quit. They pivot. And sure enough, trouble arrived before the meeting had even fully adjourned. My phone buzzed with a text from Deputy Marcus. "Sheriff, need to speak with you ASAP. In person." I told the board I'd be back in a moment, stepped outside into the warm afternoon light, and spotted Marcus leaning against his cruiser near the parking lot. His posture was rigid, his arms folded, his sunglasses reflecting the scene behind me. The community hall doors, residents spilling out in clusters, all unaware of what was coming. He removed his sunglasses. It escalated. "Bethany?" I asked. "Who else?" he said. He held up a small stack of papers clipped neatly together. Legal forms, county issued. "We served her with a cease and desist order for harassment and falsifying documents." I let out a slow breath. "Already?" He nodded. "As soon as we verified the fake Mobility Council and her attempts to collect money under an unregistered entity. She crossed the line into criminal territory, Sheriff. She didn't take it well, I'm guessing." "That's putting it lightly," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "She argued the entire time, claimed we were oppressing a lawful neighborhood initiative. She even tried to quote non-existent statutes." "Sounds like her," I muttered. "We warned her clearly. Any further impersonation of authority, trespassing, or attempts to collect money under her fake council would result in charges." He paused. "And Sheriff? She didn't seem scared. She seemed determined." That knot in my stomach tightened. "She'll retaliate," I said. "Yeah," he replied. "We're keeping a close eye." I thanked him, and he headed out. As his cruiser disappeared down the road, I returned to the hall, but I couldn't shake the image of Bethany signing those papers, her hands trembling not with fear, but with indignation. To her, this wasn't the end. It was a setback, the kind zealots write speeches about later. Inside, the board officially closed the meeting, and residents drifted home under the warm orange glow of late afternoon. Some carried their discarded citations like souvenirs. Others walked with a new looseness in their stride, free from the weight of Bethany's imaginary rules. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood felt peaceful, at least on the surface. I walked home slowly, appreciating the quiet hum of sprinklers and the faint sound of kids laughing in the distance. A breeze swept across the cul-de-sac, carrying the scent of freshly watered lawns and lake air. My boots crunched softly over gravel as I reached my porch. I looked over the neighborhood one more time. No flags, no flyers, no fluorescent vests in sight. But the quiet reminded me of something I knew too well from my days responding to domestic disputes, land arguments, and long-held grudges. People rarely explode during the fight. They explode after the fight, when they realize they've lost control. That evening, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat at the porch table reviewing my notes, organizing the binders in chronological order. Page after page, photo after photo, every ridiculous violation and every late-night intrusion, all of it forming a paper trail so damning even the most sympathetic judge would raise a brow. And yet, a part of me remained troubled. The lake shimmered under the first stars. A thin line of clouds drifted across the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, twice, then fell quiet. I heard the familiar ping of a text. Marcus again. Sheriff. Just wanted you aware. She left the station furious. Didn't say where she was going, but she said, "This community has no idea what real order looks like." I stared at the words longer than I meant to. Real order. Her words, not mine. Night settled fully around the neighborhood, bringing with it a blanket of calm I didn't quite trust. I stepped inside, turned off the porch light, and locked the door. Not because I feared Bethany, but because a good sheriff knows to respect patterns, and hers was unraveling. Around midnight, as I lay in bed listening to the soft hum of my old ceiling fan, a thought surfaced. The same one that had been whispering at the edges of my mind since the meeting. She's not finished. She's regrouping. And whatever comes next won't be small. It came as a soft chill across my arms, an instinct deeper than conscious thought. Even toppled tyrants don't walk away quietly. And Bethany Reed had just lost the crown she believed she was born to wear. Around midnight, as I lay in bed listening to the soft hum of my old ceiling fan, a thought surfaced. The same one that had been whispering at the edges of my mind since the meeting. She's not finished. She's regrouping. And whatever comes next won't be small. It came as a soft chill across my arms, an instinct deeper than conscious thought. Even toppled tyrants don't walk away quietly. And Bethany Reed had just lost the crown she believed she was born to wear. Sleep didn't come easily that night. It was thin, broken in pieces, never settling long enough to restore anything. When the first gray light leaked into the room through the blinds, I felt the kind of heaviness that comes from more than lack of rest. It was the weight of anticipation, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But the day that followed was still. Quiet. Almost unnaturally so. The neighborhood moved gently, as though everyone sensed the ripple beneath the surface. People walked their dogs, kids played basketball out front. A couple restored a porch swing. Birds chirped in the oaks lining the streets. It was the kind of ordinary morning we hadn't had in weeks. By afternoon, the tension began to thin, replaced by something that felt like relief. Soft, gradual, cautious. And for a moment, I let myself believe it might last. Days passed, then a week. The sun rose and set over a community slowly reclaiming its rhythm. The HOA board, newly reorganized, sent out a newsletter filled with nothing but gardening tips and reminders about the summer barbecue. Not a single mention of vehicular harmony or driveway silhouettes. It was almost strange to see normalcy return so quickly. Even the lake seemed calmer, its smooth surface catching the early morning light like glass. The trails smelled of pine and fresh earth again, not laminated notices. In the cool evenings, neighbors lingered outside to talk, no longer glancing over their shoulders for ambush citations. And though I stayed watchful, documenting everything as always, even I felt my shoulders drop a little each day, just enough to feel human again. Then one morning, I found a package on my porch. No return address. No handwriting. Just my name typed on a label. Sheriff's Dad, Cabin 12. I carried it to the table, half expecting glitter to explode the second I touched the tape. I opened it carefully. Pink tissue paper rustled aside to reveal a small silver box, the kind sold at craft stores for overly decorative gifts. Inside it sat a glitter bomb, unarmed, harmless, the mechanism intentionally disabled. At the bottom, a note was taped neatly. "This is what restraint looks like. You're lucky I'm taking the high road." I let out a breath through my nose. Symbolism. Her new favorite language. That evening, my son stopped by on his way back from the station. When I showed him the package, he laughed once, softly, shaking his head. She mailed you a disabled glitter bomb, Dad. That's something. Symbolic. Artistry, I said. I call it peak HOA creativity, he replied. We shared the kind of dry laughter you only manage after surviving a storm. She's not coming back, he added. Not here. I know, I said, but that doesn't mean she's done. He paused, then nodded once. He knew I was right. When spring rolled in, the world seemed to stretch and breathe again. The hills turned green, the lake thawed into a mirror. I fixed up the porch swing, replaced lights along the trail, planted tomatoes and peppers by the fence line. Neighbors stopped by with fresh bread, jars of honey, and a gratitude that felt deeper than words. Life settled, the kind of settling you feel in your bones. Until Tanya from the county records office came by one afternoon, clutching a manila folder like it was leaking danger. You need to see this, she said, stepping inside. I opened the folder. Inside were forms, fresh, incomplete, but unmistakable. A new HOA filing, 30 miles south, brand new development still under construction. Proposed board members, TBD. Proposed president, Bethany Reed. I closed the folder slowly. She's starting over, Tanya said. New neighborhood, new people who don't know her history. They will, I said. Are you going to warn them? No, I answered quietly. Some lessons can't be taught, only experienced. She exhaled. At least she's not here anymore. Exactly, I replied. And that was the truth. The neighborhood healed. The air felt lighter. The nights felt safer. In time, even the memory of the Master Key incident faded into something neighbors joked about during block parties. Every now and then, I'd sit on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching sunlight move across the lake, thinking about the strange battle she brought to my doorstep. But it didn't make me angry anymore. It made me grateful. You can't appreciate peace without surviving a storm or two, even storms wearing pastel cardigans and wielding unauthorized master keys. One quiet morning, a new couple walked down the trail with their dog. They stopped near the place where her plywood barricade once stood, looking confused as though trying to imagine what had been there. Then they smiled, waved at me, and continued toward the water. Community doesn't require control. It doesn't require authority. It doesn't require fines or citations or laminated threats. Sometimes it only needs a wave, a path, a shared space, and the absence of someone screaming about vehicular silhouettes. Bethany was gone. The cabin was mine again. The neighborhood was free. But I knew one thing for certain. Wherever she went, she carried one item more faithfully than her clipboard. Her belief that rules made her powerful, and someone, somewhere, would soon learn the truth. Real authority doesn't come from paper, or titles, or imaginary councils. It comes from responsibility, respect, and knowing exactly where the boundary line is. Justice isn't loud. It isn't vengeful. It doesn't need a spectacle. Justice waits, quietly, patiently, right at the edge of the property line. If you've ever had to stand your ground for what's right, you know how much it matters. Drop a yes in the comments if you believe real authority comes from integrity, not intimidation. And if these stories of justice, grit, and good neighbors speak to you, stick around, hit subscribe, and join me for the next ride.